God made the world and all its wonders for man to explore. And there are countless wonders just outside your front door. Now join Natural World photographer and journalist Roger W. Downs as he shares the stories of the people, places, music, and cuisines he has discovered as we explore with RWD.
Hey, welcome on in. Again, I'm Roger W. Downs, your host. Thank you so much for hanging out. I do appreciate you. If this is your first time listening to this podcast, thanks for taking a chance on it. And if this is a regular occurrence for you, thank you again for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed yet, smash that button so you can get the latest updates as I release new episodes, giving you an insight into the natural world. Now, every time we get out into the natural world, be it one of our national forests, state parks, out on a lake, even into the ocean within the region of the United States, there is a lot that goes into all of that to keeping those natural places beautiful, pristine, and protecting the wildlife. And that would be the Department of Natural Resources, among others. And one of my good friends where I grew up in Northeast Ohio, Jason Hadsell, is an Ohio Department of Natural Resource wildlife investigator. So I thought it'd be interesting to learn about what he does on a daily basis in this episode. So Jason, we know what a detective does on your local city police department, but how is your position similar or different from them?
We're in a lot of aspects very similar. We go through very similar training. Everybody's seen the police shows where they sit someone down in a room and start interrogating them, asking them questions. We go through training for interview. We go through a lot of legal reviews, whether it's constitutional law or search and seizure, because we're dealing with a lot of the same abilities as a local police department. We have these similar authorities, so we need to be up to snuff on all of our current and past laws pertaining to people's rights. In my position, I deal with more in-depth investigations to the exploitation or harm of wildlife. Everybody's gone on the pet stores and seen where you can buy turtles or buy certain species of fish. That's all regulated within my agency. I also do one of the most important things for the resources is invasive species. Lately, that's been one of my biggest tasks, which is different from a local police department. I'm certain people have heard of snakeheads. It's a big thing. It's coming across the U.S. They can get into a body of water and just ravage and outcompete all the native resources. So we deal with more of the environmental side of detective work than the person-on-person or theft or violent crimes that most departments, that's their day-to-day. I may see that half a dozen times in my career.
Yeah, I didn't think that murder would be something that you'd run into on a regular basis. Like, hey, kids, let's take dad out on the boat and push him on over. Last time he'll ever cheat. Okay. But let's talk a little bit about these snakeheads you mentioned earlier. I'm not exactly sure what those are. Can you enlighten us?
Okay. Snakeheads are a fish from the Asian area. So like China, their biggest market was in Chinese markets or Asian markets as a food source because they're a voracious feeder and they reproduce constantly. So they're going through and they'll eat anything smaller than them. But snakeheads grow average size, probably 3-4 feet larger, anywhere from 5 pounds. They look and resemble a lot like a bowfin. People that might fish in some of the backwaters or in the streams will know what a bowfin is. They're a native fish that it's got a long, almost catfish-like body, and the fins, the dorsal fin and anal fins run from about middle of the fish almost all the way back to the tail. Snakeheads, on the other hand, have a more narrow, elongate face, a little bit longer, deeper jaw, and lots of teeth.
So how did they get here if they're indigenous to Asia? That's kind of a long swim for a freshwater fish.
Well, they were imported here as a food source within Asian markets as well as within the pet trade. the pet trade, believe it or not, is probably one of the largest vectors for invasive species because people want cool and new pets. One of the ones that I've worked on in recent years, actually still ongoing, is a marbled crayfish, or they call them a blue marmocrab. And those are very popular in the pet trade because they don't take hardly any care. You only need one to reproduce. They're self-cloning. So you get one of those, and within, memory serves me right, about 145 to 170 days, they are sexually mature, and they will just start making babies. And they are an opportunistic feeder. They prefer vegetation, but they will eat, detritus material, dead stuff along the bottom, dead fish, dead plant life, and they can survive in freezing temperatures. But I found them in pet markets. You could probably, I can tell you right now, if you were to go online, you could find them right now online.
Okay, so don't get me wrong. You and I both grew up in the country, and crayfish were something you went and caught so you could do a little bit of fishing, or maybe you put them in like a boil and you ate them. Why are people so fascinated with these crayfish?
They're easy to take care of. They are kind of pretty because they've got a neon blue tint to them that's all like marble looking, which is why they call them marbled crayfish. And a lot of people that I've found that have gone and educated them on why they shouldn't have them and removing them, they have a black light fish tank light that really makes that neon blue pop.
Okay, gotcha. So it's all about the aesthetics of how it glows underneath a black light. So minus this pretty glowing crayfish, what other invasive species have you seen that doesn't belong around the Great Lakes?
Cleveland, we've had things like pacu show up in Lake Erie. Someone would catch a fish that has people teeth, which a pacu is within the same family as the piranha, but it eats vegetation.
I was going to say, if they are exactly like piranha, I wouldn't go swimming in the Great Lakes anytime soon.
And people would get one as a pet, decided they don't want it, or they're moving and they can't have it. And instead of doing the hard choice, they dump it in the lake. Well, the good thing with the pacu cannot survive below like a 40-degree temperature.
Well, that's the average temperature of the Great Lakes throughout most of the year. I mean, that's not good news for the pacu, but it is for the rest of the fish that live there.
Other than the few instances that we've seen in Lake Erie, we have only on very few and seldom occasions, I think twice in my career, one has been caught out of Lake Erie. You know, the biggest pressing issue nowadays, which has made national headlines for the last easily 10 years, is the big head and silver carp, the Asian carp. And we are constantly testing waters for eDNA, which is microsamples of DNA within water systems. And especially, we live on Lake Erie. We got yellow perch, walleye, one of the world's greatest walleye fisheries out there. So we have bait constantly moving around. And we'll get bait out of Arkansas, Missouri, some out of New York, places from out of state moving bait into Ohio. And those same companies are also moving carp for the food trade or whatever industry. We're constantly testing the waters within each tank on these big rigs that are carrying average 18 to 20 bait tanks on the back of their flatbeds. And we'll sample each one of those and put them through a gamut of tests in a eDNA tester and test to be sure that there's no eDNA in that water.
And from what I've read before, Jason, invasive species is a huge problem across the United States. Can you share about some of the other species that we're seeing in other states across the country?
Yeah, it is not just a one state issue. Invasive species are across the nation. You keep watching news headlines and coming across in shipping containers are various spiders. Emerald ash borers, prime one to think about. Emerald ash borers came in on pallet shipments from overseas. That's another version of an invasive species. Lanternflies, same thing. They came in across cargo from overseas, and now we're getting them across the U.S. I just saw something the other day that they were talking about the emerald ash borer becoming an issue going all the way out to the West Coast in Washington and Oregon State. They're keeping an eye out because that's what they have for shade trees and timber over there. and they're worried about that really hurting their infrastructure as well as their economies.
Now, before you start to freak out and think that invasive species can't be stopped, there are campaigns in the works to be able to limit the problems that they're causing. And our guest, wildlife investigator for the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Jason Hadsell, will educate us on those coming up next.
Don't wander off now. Explore with RWD will be right back after this.
Hey, Roger W. Downs here again, and this is your personal invitation to visit my website, WNCPhotoArt.com. That's WNCPhotoArt.com, where I put up different images that I've captured in the natural world. I love to share God's artistry with you, and I would invite you to please go see some of them right now. WNCPhotoArt.com.
Welcome back to Explore with RWD.
And again, our guest today is Jason Hadsell, wildlife investigator for the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. And we've stumbled across kind of an interesting topic with him during his visit with us, and that is about invasive species that have made their way from around the world to the United States, mostly on cargo ships and through the pet trade. But is there a way that we can help stop the damage that they're causing to the native animals and the landscapes? Jason?
The first key is kind of what I'm doing here today, educating people. Because if we can get the information out and really stress the importance and danger to our resources of these invasive species, we build an army. So the education is the first thing. The other thing is collaboration between other state and federal agencies. We have to work together in order to keep the common good. So we'll work with U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We've worked with Pennsylvania Game and Fish, their Forestry Service. You have to have an open line of communication.
Okay, so that's step one, education. But the next step is having to crack down on the pet stores that obviously are selling these invasive species. How does that play out in your career?
One of those many parts of my job is during our slower seasons, February, March, I am in random pet stores throughout Northeast Ohio in plain clothes, just walking through, looking to see what they have. Some of them may be licensed, wildlife permitted propagators that are allowed to handle and sell in the pet trade certain native species in Ohio. And those people, I can go in and I actually have authority to look at their records, what they're buying, where they're buying from, and who they're going to. Other places, if I walk in and I can positively identify, maybe they're not permitted by the state of Ohio, they're not selling anything native to Ohio, basic pet trade, and I walk in and I see marbled crayfish. The scenario could be different many different times, but the average scenario is I walk up and I speak with the manager, the owner, identify who I am and who I work for. Typically, once they know that it is unlawful for them to sell and how injurious it could be to our resources, they're very cooperative and will surrender, give us those marble crayfish and any records that they have of who may have bought them, so we can track those down and also get those, because they are unlawful to possess, buy, sell.
So once you confiscate the crayfish, then what do you do with them? I mean, are they tasty with a little bit of salt and lemon after a boil?
That's one of those that there's been question on whether or not we end up having to take them. We euthanize them humanely, and most of them, especially the better specimens, we will save and use them for educational purposes to really get something in someone's hand to see what they really are.
Well, I certainly appreciate the heads up on the invasive species, because obviously if we're planning on going to the pet store and looking at exotic pets, we should be aware that an exotic pet that is not from the area could cause a lot of damage, not only to the wildlife, but also the plant life in our backyards and beyond. But let's talk a little bit more about a career with the Department of Natural Resources as a wildlife investigator. What is a typical day like for you?
I'm technically my own boss. I see my supervisor once every probably 3 or 4 weeks, and he just makes sure that I'm on task and on time. But other than that, I'll get up in the morning, look at the weather. We'll assume the weather's fair. within my position, I also monitor our commercial fishing for yellow perch, white bass, white perch, and many other different species other than walleye in Ohio. And we have 24-hour monitoring on our commercial vessel. So I'll look at the commercial tracking site, and if I see some of our commercial fishermen out, that's my first priority. So I will go out, I'll monitor that site, and I'll be within that area waiting for them to return from checking their nets. And they could be out there for 6 to 8 hours, so I'm not just sitting around staring at the lake while I'm waiting for them and monitoring the site. I could be sitting at a ramp as an investigator. I have multiple options. I could be working a complaint. You know, on Lake Erie, we require a Lake Erie fishing guide license for people to operate as a fishing guide. People pay them money to go out and catch fish. And I've got several of those complaints where there are individuals that are working as unlicensed fishing guides that are putting themselves and others at risk, taking them out on the water, not having proper U.S. Coast Guard training and our permit. So I could be sitting off doing surveillance, monitoring that individual, waiting for them to come back in or go back out and see the activities as they go.
Without a doubt, you must be one of the favorite guys at the dock.
You know, the biggest key to this job is treating people how you'd like to be treated. So, yeah, there are points and times that it's like, oh man, there's a game warden. But you'd be amazed the number of people that are just happy to see you and happy that you're out there doing your job and trying to keep people honest.
Okay, minus that then, what is your favorite part of your career so far, Jason?
My absolute favorite is the whole reason I got into this job. Teaching people about the outdoors and starting that fire for that passion of whether they hunt, they fish, they trap, or they bird watch, or they're a forager, you know, going out in the woods and finding edibles. Being able to start that spark and get people off the couch and in the woods is probably my favorite part of the job. And in my line of work, that's where I can excel, because I'm constantly out talking to people, showing them things. And there's always an opportunity to educate, and there's always an opportunity to learn. So that's probably my absolute favorite. And beyond that, I would say being able to catch, especially as an investigator, being able to catch the guys that are really exploiting the resource. When I was a field officer, 9 times out of 10, it was your average person making an average mistake. Didn't look at their fishing license to realize it was expired, something like that. Whereas now in my position as an investigator, it's hours and hours and hours of seat time, but I'm able to detect and apprehend those people that, for example, a recent case, we had some out-of-state people that went out, launched their boat out of one ramp, went out and caught their limit of walleye, went back to the hotel, sat there for a couple hours, had lunch, and then went down to Lakeshore Park in Ashtabula, launched out of there, and caught another limit of fish. And I was there waiting at the dock.
Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? Bad boys.
Sorry, I just had to play that. But how did you know that they were going to do that? I mean, they left the lake, went back to the hotel, and then went to a completely different launch.
Some of it's luck. Some of it's experience. It's being in the right place, right time, and a lot of road time. That day, I actually had a project going where I had 3 other investigators over here and 2 uniformed officers. So I actually had people at 3 different ramps, and we share the information. Say I'm sitting at Geneva State Park ramp, and I see that this boat, this description, these numbers on the boat came out of here. I pass it on through our emails, whatever, to all the other investigators. And it just so happened that boat showed up at another ramp, and that investigator called me up and said, "Hey, winner.
Chicken dinner." Look, you just got to stay within the limits and within the laws, and you won't have to worry about the game warden or the wildlife investigators tag teaming you, right?
It can get bad. I mean, it's been 4 years ago now, but we had a group of 3 boats, 6 individuals from out of state that were up here over a 4th of July weekend for 3 days. And in those 3 days, we ended up seizing over 115 walleye that were over limit.
115 over the limit? That is ridiculous.
Well, a lot of our wildlife crimes in the last 18 years of me being with the Division of Wildlife that are doing stuff like that, and even the more adamant poachers, we'll call them what they are. The adamant poachers are out there for greed, pride, ego, some sort of personal gain, and going into the commercialization, monetary. You know, who knows? Those guys with all those fish, were they going back home to sell them back home? Because it's unlawful to sell sport caught fish in Ohio.
Yeah, that's a huge no-no. However, if you are going to go out fishing in the Great Lakes, you are allowed to catch your limit and then give those fish away, but you cannot collect any money for that. And if you do, there'll be a big hefty fine that comes along, plus some possible jail time. So, Jason, we know what your favorite part of your career is. What is the least favorite part of your career?
One of the hardest parts of my job are major hunter incidents. Hunter incidents where either an individual was shot yet survived, or the worst case scenario, an individual was shot and killed. I've had several of the fatal hunter incidents within my career, and those stick with you. It's just as much difficult as the detail investigation, documenting, and reporting as it is just the emotional toll on, you know, having to deal with the families and notify the families and carry that with you and still move forward. I've had hunter incidents where children were involved, and those can be just as difficult, actually more. A lot of our hunter incidents, and any hunter incident throughout the U.S. or anywhere else, can be prevented by a couple seconds of, how do I do this? Is this right? Is this safe? Knowing your target and beyond. Am I identifying your target is probably the biggest one. Is this what I'm supposed to be shooting at?
Amen to that, because there's been too many incidents, even if there was just only one, there's been too many incidents where people go out and they get overzealous on maybe their first day out hunting or whatever the case may be, and they take a shot without knowing what they're actually aiming at. So please know what you're shooting at and what is beyond your target. But Jason, let's talk a little bit about when people go missing, because we do hear stories about how hunters just suddenly go missing. Have you ever had to handle one of those situations?
That is part of my job, and not only in the woods, the wildlife areas, you name it. I also, when I'm on patrol, because I'm a Lake Erie investigator, I'm on the water quite a bit. I may be the nearest public safety boat on the water, and we get a call for a boat in distress or a person in the water. We need to respond. I've assisted with U.S. Coast Guard for vessel assists. Not just Coast Guard. I got to put in natural resources officers, our parks and watercraft officers. They're off somewhere else because Lake Erie is a big lake, and they can't always be in the same area just like me. But I've assisted them with vessel searches, vessels in distress, as well as helping them with grid searches for recoveries. But that is definitely part of the job. And it's difficult in the woods, but once again, it goes into many of our different trainings. Throughout our officers' and investigators' careers, we will go through several trainings in man tracking, making us more proficient into tracking humans through the woods, let alone animals.
Oh, that's cool. So what is the difference between tracking, let's say, a white-tailed deer and a fugitive?
The movements. Most movements, whether it's people or animals, are fairly predictable, but it's not very often you see deer or bear just tromp through and break things down just because it's in their way.
Unless, of course, it's Bigfoot. Just ask Wes over on the Sasquatch Chronicles podcast. Sorry, had to throw that in there. Love you, Wes. All right, get back to it, Jason.
They'll avoid obstacles. They'll go around certain obstacles. Limb breaks are generally a dead giveaway. And just how the forest floor acts with a size 11.5 shoe versus a 2.5 inch in diameter hoof. So there's definitely differences in being an avid outdoorsman like myself. You know, I'm an avid trapper, and I pride myself on paying attention to those little details. So people do move a little different than the wild animals in the woods. I don't know if you've ever been able to experience a wild moose up in Canada or anywhere out in the wild. For a 1,200-pound animal to move so quietly through the woods and hardly leave a track, a 180-pound man would leave more sign than that moose.
Wow. I never thought that'd be the case. Moose are huge. But again, we're chatting with Ohio Department of Natural Resources wildlife investigator Jason Hadsell about a career with the Department of Natural Resources. When we come back, we'll talk more about searching for people in the forest and what happens when they can't find them. Stick around.
Explore with RWD. We'll be right back after this.
Hey, Roger W. Downs here again, and this is your personal invitation to visit my website, wncphotoart.com. That's wncphotoart.com, where I put up different images that I've captured in the natural world. I love to share God's artistry with you, and I would invite you to please go see some of them right now. wncphotoart.com.
That wasn't too bad, now was it? Welcome back to Explore with RWD.
Hey, thank you so much for listening with the Explore with RWD podcast. I'm your host, Roger W. Downs. And if this is your first time listening, man, I really do appreciate you. But if you love what you're hearing, hit that subscribe button right now. Go ahead, click it. Go on, I'll wait for you. That way you can get the latest updates of when new episodes are available so we can go explore the natural world together. And again, our guest today is Jason Hadsell, a wildlife investigator with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. And we're talking about a career in the Department of Natural Resources, which spans a lot of different duties, including when people go missing out in the natural world. Jason, when that happens, have you ever had a situation where you couldn't find someone?
It does, but the search doesn't stop. And within the last, forgive me, I don't remember when we started it, but we finally got a canine program in Ohio that our canines are mostly trained in evidence recovery and man tracking. Our canine officers will get calls for assistance from other agencies as well when they have a missing person, especially whether it's a missing hunter or a subdevelopment or a small community that they end up with someone that has Alzheimer's or dementia that wanders away from a home. We can go out and assist, especially in a more rural environment.
And that's great news for any family who's unfortunately lost maybe a senior citizen who's suffering from dementia or a small child who's wandered off, especially if they live out in the country in a rural setting, because police officers and even sheriff's deputies may not have the tracking skills that, let's say, a wildlife investigator from the Department of Natural Resources would have in finding someone in a swamp, a forest, or even an open field.
Yeah, it's just different trainings.
So let's talk about someone scoring a career with the Department of Natural Resources as a wildlife investigator. What's your first piece of advice to them?
Rule number one, clean lifestyle. The adage of what I did in my youth will not affect me in my adult life can. When we go through our hiring process, there is not only a civil service test, there's also a in-depth background investigation where we go back and we talk to not only your family members, but more importantly, your previous employers. Could be your high school teachers, could be your neighbors, and learning more about who you are as a person and also how you've grown as a person. It doesn't mean you'll be completely disqualified from it, but if there's no signs of maturity and growth throughout the years, you're less likely to be a candidate. Intemperate use of drugs, that'll knock you out right off the bat. But beyond that, the professional side of things, any chance you get to volunteer or spend some time with other people, whether you're in 4-H or you're volunteering, you become a hunter education instructor, or where you can be an instructor to teach kids how to fish. National Archery's in the Schools program. If you are volunteering and teaching kids for archery in the schools, all those volunteer things are keystones within your development into this career. And it doesn't even have to be with your local Department of Natural Resources. It can be with local metro parks or local animal rescue places. Like there's several wildlife rehabilitators in the area that would love to have people come and help animals like birds of prey that get injured because of they hit a window, they ran into a car, or vice versa. Anytime that a person can volunteer within the realm of the natural resources is always a big step. The last part in that is the education. We require a minimum of a 2-year associate's degree in criminal justice or environmental sciences, whether it's wildlife management, fisheries management, anything in environmental sciences.
That's certainly some good information there, Jason. But let's wrap things up here with one last question. For those people who don't want to become, let's say, a wildlife investigator with the Department of Natural Resources, whichever state they may be in, but they still love the great outdoors and they're out there enjoying it with their family, or maybe they're doing a little hiking or photography like I like to do, and they see someone, let's say, drop a bunch of junk off in the middle of the national park system and just throw trash out, or maybe they're poaching. How do they report that?
They can give the information anonymous. They can give the information that they're willing to talk to an officer, but they still want to stay anonymous, so they leave a contact number. There's all kinds of ways. Or I can give you a perfect example. Yesterday, I'm pumping gas at the gas station yesterday. I was going out on the boat. I was in uniform. And a gentleman pulled me up to the side and said, "Sir, could I talk to you about something?" And he gave me really good information. So it's another one of those, don't be afraid to approach us. We don't bite often.
Only when you're hungry, right?
If you see something going on, because some of those complaints that we've gotten from anonymous people turn into major violations that what they saw might have only looked minor, but the more guys like me dig into those investigations, we find much larger, more nefarious issues.
So in short, if you see something, say something. And feel free to call 911 if you have to, or just use your phone and look up your Department of Natural Resource phone number or your Fish and Game phone number or whatever organization you want to reach out to report poaching, people dumping trash, or doing some illegal activities out in the national parks, forests, even in the metro parks. Report it if you see it. Again, our guest, Jason Hadsell, a wildlife investigator with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. Jason, thank you so much for sharing your insight on a career with the ODNR. I'm Roger W. Downs. Thank you for listening to Explore with RWD. I really do appreciate you. If you love what you heard today, please hit that subscribe button so you can get the latest updates when I release new episodes helping you to explore the natural world. And look, if no one else has told you this yet today, I love you, and I know the good Lord above loves you. He's promised you that. So please make sure to count your blessings, because life truly is good. And more importantly, no matter what you've done, you are forgiven. All you need to do is ask. So until next time, peace, love, and coon dogs, y'all.
Thank you for listening. Visit us online at explorewithrwd.com to discover more about Roger, his photography, podcast, and adventures. Or follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Explore with RWD. Remember, we didn't inherit the earth from our parents. We borrow it from our children. May God bless you and yours. Now get outside and go explore. Explore with RWD is produced by Downs Media Incorporated. All rights reserved.